We're getting so much feedback about Joe Biden and his accomplishments. So I thought we'd just quickly do a little retrospective before we get into our friend Patrick Moore. I mean, some of the Joe Biden highlights, because we couldn't get to all the callers who had suggestions to help us make the case for his receipt of the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Chuck Graham, state senator's here. Stand up, Chuck. Let him see you. Oh, God love you. What am I talking about?
If we do everything right, there's still a 30% chance we're going to get it wrong.
The stock market crashed. Franklin Roosevelt got on television.
If I took you in blindfold and you took you to LaGuardia Airport in New York, you must think I must be in some third world country.
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent.
They're going to put you all back in chains. And his mom, God rest her soul, and although wait, your mom's still alive as your dad passed.
I'm proud to be President of the United States.
Where is it written we cannot lead the world in the 20th century in making automobiles? I've not seen it written anywhere. Wisest man in the Orient.
Yeah, and that's why President Obama said of Joe Biden, God has never created a better person, to which God replied, yeah, I've done better.
Oh.
And speaking of the circus music, it's a nice transition to the circus of these confirmation hearings for Trump nominations to various cabinet posts, including CIA director. Of course, you think CIA director, the first issue that comes to your mind, climate change.
Oh, hey,
of course.
You know what? It was right on the tip of my tongue.
Freshman Senator Kamala Harris, D. California.
What's your nickname for her?
Kamala the Ugandan Giant. Little hat tip to Kamala Uganda Giant, the World Wrestling Federation from my childhood. Kamala Harris querying CIA Director nominee Mike Pompeo about climate change.
CIA Director Brennan, who spent a 25-year career at the CIA as an analyst, a senior manager, and station chief in the field, has said that when, quote, CIA analysts look for deeper causes of rising instability in the world, one of the causes those CIA analysts see is the impact of climate change. Do you have any reason to doubt the assessment of these CIA analysts?
Senator Harris, I haven't had a chance to read those materials with respect to climate change. I do know the agency's role there. Its role is to collect foreign intelligence, to understand threats to the world. That would certainly include threats from poor governance, regional instability, threats from all sources, and deliver that information to policymakers. And to the extent that changes in climatic activity are part of that foreign intelligence collection task, we will deliver that information to you all and to the President.
Yeah, Pompeo smartly didn't want to get too deep in the weeds on this ancillary issue, but we're going to. And to help us do that, we're joined by our friend Patrick Moore. He is the co-founder of Greenpeace, now part of the CO2 Coalition. Patrick Moore, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Nice to be here, Dan. Hi, Amy.
Kamala Harris talking about the CIA and their threat assessments with respect to climate change and the prospect, as President Obama said in his farewell address, of these climate refugees soon becoming an international crisis. What is the likelihood of that threat assessment manifesting itself in the real world?
Well, you know, this has become just almost childish. Between John Kerry and President Obama going on about climate change being the greatest threat to the national security of the United States, and having all these intelligence agencies and the military fighting climate change. You know, I mean, this whole idea of fighting climate change is about the stupidest thing that has ever come down the pike. And I'm so happy that finally we are going to get some real science into the administration of the United States instead of this fake news climate change. It's ridiculous. Of course the climate changes, but look at this winter. It's cold all over Europe. The wind and solar energy is not working in Germany for weeks because of the calm air and this high-pressure zone that's come down over both North America and Europe and Asia. And it's cold, and it's liable to get colder because the sun has gone into a very low cycle. And some people believe that the sun is involved in climate change, and you never hear them talk about that. of course, the sun is responsible for the climate. If it wasn't a sun up there, this would be a frozen ball of rock. So it's time to get real about climate change and to start studying it as a science rather than as a political tool to get money and power, which is what it's been used for over these last few decades.
But what in the world was Senator Harris talking about? There's a correlation between the CIA and climate control. Could you explain her thinking or her line of questioning?
There is no logic behind that. It's just that they like to say climate change whenever they get a chance because apparently it appeals to a lot of people. It is true that the climate is a very important thing. And if somebody was destroying it, it would be a bad thing. But it's actually got a little bit warmer over the last 200 or 300 years since the Little Ice Age eased off, and that wasn't a very nice time for farmers. And now the growing season is longer now than it was back then. The River Thames in England froze over the last time in 1814 after it had been freezing over pretty regularly in the winters for 200 or 300 years. The Little Ice Age was not a good time, and this is the modern warm period, and thankfully it is getting a little bit warmer, although now we might be going into a dip. There's cycles upon cycles when you go through these temperature changes, and this may be a cold snap coming on that could last for 10, 20, 30 years, so let's hope not. But many are predicting such a thing.
Well, Kamala Harris repeated the talking point of the left on this topic, that the science is settled. And, do you, Mike Pompeo, disavow the conclusions of NASA and NOAA and all the other alphabet soup agencies? Well, in point of fact, it's a bit strange that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, refuses to release the underlying data on which they base their models and their predictions and their policy recommendations. And there are scientists and former scientists, NASA, like Dr. Roy Spencer, who essentially agree with your position on it. So it seems like this effort to continue to just repeat incessantly, the debate is over, the science is settled. Well, there's a lot of scientists and climatologists and that disagree on the merits, and there's a lot of models that have been proven erroneous from those proponents of climate change. And then there's just the unwillingness to release the data, the underlying data itself, which is an odd approach for someone who is a scientist and believes in peer review and the scientific method.
Oh, it's just all completely out of control, Dan. We've got the CO2 coalition now. It's been in operation for 2 years. Our position is that carbon dioxide is entirely beneficial, partly because it is the main food for all life on Earth. You'd think they might notice that.
That seems to be important. Yeah, that would seem to be important.
Life is all carbon-based. The carbon for life comes from CO2 in the atmosphere. That's what plants use for their main food, along with water and the other nutrients they need. But carbon dioxide and water are the two most important ingredients of life. That's what sugar is made with. Glucose, by photosynthesis, is made from carbon dioxide and water. That is the basis of energy for all life on Earth, and in fact is the basis for all the fossil fuels that provide 85% of world energy today, was photosynthesis. All the fossil fuels were made with solar energy, and they are organic, as in organic chemistry, which is the chemistry of carbon. People have to learn a few basics about science in order to throw off this complete fabrication that has been foisted upon the whole world that carbon dioxide is dangerous and a pollutant. And the first thing the EPA has to do, and I hope Scott Pruitt does this when he gets in there, is to reverse the endangerment finding on CO2. That is the basis of all of these so-called climate change policies, but in fact they are energy policies, and energy underlies our entire economy. And they are making energy more expensive and more difficult to get with these rules. The Clean Energy Plan is based on getting rid of carbon dioxide. That is stupid. Carbon dioxide is fertilizer for all of our food crops and our forests. And if it was doubled from what it is now, that would be a good thing.
And so I hear you saying it would be a bad idea to make photosynthesis illegal. So that's probably not the way we want to go. What about this idea, and again, in terms of the science is settled, the left position is always carbon emissions, carbon emissions, carbon emissions, which you're just speaking to. But Donald Trump has sent a sort of mixed signals, in part maybe because of Ivanka's view on this, about the Paris Accords. Your view on the deleterious impact of those accords if the United States were to go down that road or even take a neutral posture?
The United States doesn't have to get out of the Paris Accord because it has no teeth. It doesn't mean anything. They called it the historic Paris Accord when there's not a single thing in it that is binding on anyone, and there are no consequences for not living up to the things you said you might do. And China, for example, was given a free pass to continue increasing its CO2 emissions until at least 2030, which might as well be eternally. There's nothing in that Paris Accord that actually requires anybody to do anything. So any country that wants to, including the United States, can basically just ignore it and continue going to the meetings. And maybe at some point trying to turn it around into something useful. I doubt that can happen because it's totally focused on getting rid of carbon dioxide and fossil fuels. And, we got to the point where a little over a year ago, all 7 leaders of the G7 countries, the most powerful countries in the world, agreed that fossil fuels should be eliminated entirely by the end of the century. And for them to do that sends a signal to people that we could actually do that. And it's not possible, not with our present civilization. And people, think about it. Fossil fuels, 85% of our energy, are the most responsible for our longevity, the fact that we're living longer today than we did 30, 40, 50 years ago. They are responsible for our prosperity, i.e. our wealth and standard of living. And they are responsible for our personal freedom, i.e. the fact that we can get in a car or a bus or a truck and go somewhere without having to walk or ride on a horse. And people have got so completely distanced from reality in this discussion, and they've got to come back to reality. And thank goodness President-elect Trump and his cabinet are a group of people who are much more grounded in reality than the bunch of fantasy world people we've had in place on these issues for the last 8 years.
All right. He is Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace, now CO2 Coalition. Patrick, thanks so much for your insights. As always, we'll have you back when Scott Pruitt goes before the firing squad on Capitol Hill and has to field more junk science questions. Appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Anytime, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.